Right. We have an epidemic of people who are trapped within their egos and not recognizing that they are unconsciously acting from a program that doesn't necessarily serve them, or that isn't really even necessarily their true selves. So often when we hear the word ego, we think arrogant. Yeah, we think somebody who's egotistical. We think somebody who is, somebody that's too self-involved, which isn't really. That's rather misleading, because the truth of the matter is that the ego is a part of yourself that unconsciously acts from subconscious programming. Okay, so what does that mean? So, as a human, we have innate natures. We have innate parts of ourselves that are primordial characteristics of being a human being, such as the desire to fornicate, the fight, flight, or flee or freeze responses. These things are inherent within every human being, and they act unconsciously for us. There's something that takes over within the human body there to protect us, okay? Without us having to think about it, okay? It's an immediate reaction. So for instance, you step out off the curb, you see a car coming, your unconscious programming for safety automatically kicks in, creates an autonomic nervous response, and you go into fight or flight. The best response obviously is not to fight a car, but is to flee it. And so you step back and you have that very it's an automatic program that kicks in, okay? So if you imagine yourself a little bit like a computer, you have programs and software that have been installed on your hardware system to kick in at certain points, okay? Now, the problem is that most people never, ever update their systems. And they are running from systems that are faulty in some way, shape, or form, or have a virus within them, a Trojan, something that's stopping the program from working effectively. So, for instance, if you have chronic anxiety, okay, chronic anxiety is part of the autonomic nervous response. It's part of the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn trauma responses. When something bad is happening, you have a response that kicks in and creates anxiety in that moment, which is a norepinephrine and an adrenaline and a cortisol reaction in the body. Okay, that is what anxiety is. Most people who suffer with generalized anxiety are anxious about things that are unimportant. Now, why is that? Because you haven't calibrated your system for the world that you're living in. So for instance, you're working on, Windows 7, and you're living in I don't even know what Windows is on, I'm a Mac user, but do you know what I mean? You're on a Windows, 12 world, I don't know what the Windows is now. But, so your Windows 7 just doesn't compute, it doesn't work, because it's too old for the environment that it's within, which is causing glitching and problems within your system. So unless you update your systems, you're going to consistently have these problems. Now, how does a human update their systems? Well, through therapy, through hypnotherapy, through subconscious subliminal work, through conscious work, through talking, through shadow work, through reading books, by becoming conscious of the unconscious. So you have all of these programs that are running in your life, okay, that are creating anxiety for you, that are creating trauma for you, and you are not doing anything about them. You are just saying, I'm an anxious person. Oh, I'm an anxious person. You're not a fucking anxious person. Sorry. Shouldn't shout at people who are anxious. But you're not. You're not an anxious person. And the more that you say to yourself, I am this, the more that you are consciously creating that strong subconscious program that re-emits the system call of we are anxious, keep being anxious, look for things to be anxious for, because you are dictating to your system what it is that you are, and how it should respond. Does that make sense? So if you do not update your systems and you don't calibrate your system for the world that you're living in, which means when your boss says to you, well, I'm my own boss, so that doesn't, I was going to use myself as an example, but I'm my own boss. I'm not frightened of that bitch. When your boss says to you, Jeffrey, I need to have a talk to you at after work. Can I see you at 4:30? And you immediately go, oh my God, I'm going to get sacked. Even though you've done nothing wrong, you know consciously you've done nothing wrong, but on your inside inner sphere, that unconscious programming of a primordial fear of being thrown out of the clan, yeah, which means sudden death to a human being. We are social creatures. We have been born with thousands of years of evolution, of requirement of the clan, of the tribe for us to survive. So anything in our modern day setting that sets off that primordial fear kicks in an anxiety reaction that is immensely huge, because in the conscious moment, in the present day, you're worried that you're going to get told off and lose your job. But from your unconscious programming, you have thousands of years of evolution and primordial fear connected to your ancestral lineage that probably has had some, well, probably wouldn't have done because they probably would have died and not reproduced, but has definitely had somebody where they've watched somebody get thrown out the clan and poor old, caveman man died outside being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And so these primordial fears of these very deep fears, which is of starvation, okay, of famine, of not finding somebody to reproduce with, of being thrown out of the clan, of being extradited, of being outside as an outcast, an outsider. That feeling is so strong and so present within you that if you don't recognize that you are being driven by a primordial urge that doesn't actually affect you anymore, do you hear that? Doesn't affect you anymore, because you can live very happily, childless, single. There is no famine in the Western world. If you're on the phone, if you have a phone, I'm talking to you, you're not facing a famine most likely. These inherent fears that we have within ourselves don't exist. They're not applicable. And so you're getting an anxiety reaction that's based on all of these huge fears, but in response to something as innocuous and pointless and unimportant as your manager asking to speak to you. And the truth of the matter is that even if you were sacked, it doesn't matter. And most of those times when you are worrying and you're having a fear that these bad, terrible, horrendous things are happening, they don't actually ever come to fruition. You go and sit down with your boss and they say, I just wanted to say you've been doing a really good job, and we were thinking about giving you a pay rise or something. You're like, why have I been worrying all day? Yeah? You've been worrying all day because you're not in control of your unconscious programming. You are running from a faulty, uncalibrated program, from a system that hasn't been updated because you haven't done your personal work. That's it. You are not an anxious person. You are not an angry person. You are not a fearful person. You are not a person with all of most of the fucking mental health problems that you want to profess that you have. What you are is a tardy and lazy person who hasn't done their personal work. And it will only be the personal work of updating your systems, your operating systems, that allows you to circumvent your ego and recognize when you have programs, ideas, systems, constructs, societal, cultural beliefs, whatever, indoctrination, whatever the fuck you want to call it, the matrix, yeah, you are not aware when those things are taking over you consciously. And until you become aware that something is taking over you consciously, you cannot deal with it. So how do you become aware of your unconscious programming? Well, one of the most important things to do is shadow work. So the shadow is the part of ourselves that is in the darkness. It's part of us that we don't recognize what we are. Now, the reason why I started talking about this, because I was just talking about men being inherently romantic. However, in the world today, men are being triggered into their wounded masculine, which means that they are feeling challenged on their masculinity, which means that they are stepping into a dominant and aggressive position because they don't feel comfortable and confident within their warrior self, okay? A real man who knows his strength doesn't need to fight because he knows how strong he is. A man who is not confident in his strength will want to pick a fight with every man he can, and he will often go towards the biggest man in the room to prove himself to everybody else that's watching him. Now, all of that comes from an inner inferiority complex that's based on the primordial ego, in effect, of having to be the alpha male of some form, shape, or form, because otherwise I won't get a mate, I will be seen as being the weakest, I will be persecuted within my tribe. Okay? So, we were talking about these men being inherently romantic, okay? Now, why do men in this generation shy away from being romantic and giving romantic gestures to their partners? Because they feel it makes them look like a cuck. They feel like it inhibits their masculinity, okay? They feel vulnerable in that moment. They feel like they're serving their wife or their lover or their woman or whatever. And so that makes them feel, it triggers off that wound of inferiority. Now, there is no inferiority because, in effect, a good leader leads from the front, which means you've got loads of people behind you. Now, a leader who is strong and confident in his ruling will lead from the front without a fear that somebody's going to stab him in the back. But an inferior man will always want to lead from the back because he's frightened of being stabbed in the back. So, my cat's just come in to join us. So, where is your ego? Where is your subconscious programming tripping you up? And often it comes in the view of doing non-self-serving behaviors, like addictive behaviors, like addiction, like being abusive to people that you love, having a sharp tongue, not knowing how to process your emotions, not knowing how to be vulnerable, not knowing how to talk about your emotions, all of these kind of things. And all of these things, and this isn't just men, all of these things come from being in the wounded self. It comes from a shadow side that at some point in your life, in your childhood, the thing that you are unable to do was shamed in some way, shape, or form by your parent or caregiver, which meant that you rejected that part of yourself, and that part of yourself became your shadow. Now, the problem is the shadow is always there. And if you don't integrate it and work with it, it will be banging on the door, waiting for an opportunity to come out and play. And often it will come out in the most disturbing and awful ways that truly fuck up your life, okay? So, for instance, you are a man who has been taught not to be vulnerable. You had a parent, a father who sat in his own inability to be vulnerable. And so he felt weak when he was vulnerable. He felt weak when he spoke about his emotions. He felt weak when he was honest about how he felt. And so he ran from that part of himself. And so whenever you used to show your emotions, it would trigger him because he would be looking at you, seeing you as being a more strong person than he was capable of being. Okay, so he has shut down this part of himself to be vulnerable, to be honest, to talk about his feelings. When he sees his son doing that, he's horrified by it because his son is able to do something that he's not able to do. And so what does he do? He shuts his child down, and he'll call them, whatever. You're a puff, you're gay, emotions are for girls, don't be such a pussy. All of these kind of very toxic masculine kind of and homophobic kind of rhetoric that we would have during our generation, talking from sort of 80s, 90s here. Okay, if you're offended by the language, tough shit. Do the work. That's your shadow side, not mine. So, but this is true. This is what people would say to each other. And so it had a very, very difficult rhetoric. And because of that, we have a generation of emotionally wounded men who view emotion as being ultimately effeminate. And so because they're within the wounded masculine side, there's in no way, shape or form that they can embrace their feminine sides. Okay, they can't do that because they feel weak in that moment. And in that moment, the shadow self steps in and is like, oh, we can't, we can't be that. We can't do that. It starts to run the unconscious programming that if you do the thing that is not accepted, I will be thrown out of the clan. And so I must continue to wear this mask. Now, these masks are not created to help or serve us, okay? And the one way that we have to really live is living authentically is one of the most important things. But the other most important thing is recognizing when we have a program that's running that we didn't create, okay? If you're a masculine, if you're a man who has issues with speaking about your emotions and being vulnerable about your feelings and your emotions because of something that your father did, or because of some bullying that happened at school, or whatever, that's not you. That isn't who you genuinely are. That is who you had to become to survive the trauma. Which means that you need to process the trauma and unbecome what you became to survive that trauma. I had a very traumatic childhood. I did an awful lot of things. I've done a hell of a lot of things I am not proud of. I very rarely speak about because I'm still ashamed of it, which I need to work on myself with my shadow side and the feelings of shame, which comes from perfectionism and always having to be the best. And if you have narcissistic parents that do the whole golden child scapegoat triangulation, good fucking luck, because shame would have been used as a weapon against you at every opportunity. So if you came from these unconscious, emotionally immature parents and they have fucked you up, then I'm sorry, but the only person that can do the work is you. And you need to do the work by recognizing that you have unconscious patterns running, software program running in the back that got installed as a result of the trauma of your childhood, as a result of somebody else's, your parents' trauma, which they passed on to you because they were unconscious and running these programs that their parents gave to them. And so the domino race goes on and continues. So you must face that you have this software running. And the only thing that you can do is to challenge yourself, is to look at yourself in a very honest, authentic, and brutal manner. Why can I not have an emotion? You must ask yourself, when was the first time that I was showing big emotions as a child and somebody shamed me for it and said, stop being such a little girl? When was that? When was the first time that somebody spoke to you like that? Who was it? What did they say? How did you feel? What did you want them to do in comparison to what did they do? Because at that point, that child, you, my darling, my love, you would have learnt that when you show emotions, you are shunned by your caregiver, which as a child is abject terror. As an adult, we still have this primordial programming for rejection and abandonment within us. As a child, 1,000 times more. 1,000 times more painful. And because as a child, you view your parents as being the perfection, being the gold standard of what a human is supposed to be and look like, you immediately internalize what they've said. Because it can't be that they are wrong, it must be that you are wrong. And so you internalize what they said to you. And you made that part of your programming. That I am wrong when I show emotion. I am wrong. I'm too much. When I'm too loud. When I'm too emotional. When I have a feeling. When I say what I think. When I don't do as I'm told. When I don't validate my parents. When I don't serve my parents. When I don't... Whatever the fuck your screwed up parents did to you. Okay? With all the love in the world... We're all fucked up. We're all victims of victims. So don't play the fucking victim card here. When that happened, it created a program in you that has been running silently since that day. And hasn't that been long enough? Have you not suffered enough? When are you going to face your shadows and integrate them and reparent your inner child who is screaming at the door, which is why you drink, which is why you smoke, which is why you don't want to be with friends, you don't want to have a lover, you don't trust yourself with the people that you truly love, why you have half relationships with people you don't really like, why you're not vulnerable. The time is now, my sweetheart. It is time for you to now face your shadow and to do the inner work, because if you don't, you're going to lose more. You've already lost a lot. If you're interested in working with me, there's links below. I'm going to leave some stuff about shadow work. Have a listen to the podcast. I'll leave some shadow work prompts for you to do. One of the best ways to dive into this is just journaling. Get started with journaling with those shadow work prompts. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. With those shadow work prompts. When was I first shamed? When was I told that this was not acceptable for a human being? When was I told I was too much or not enough? Start there. Journal it. And when you have an emotion, don't run from it. Don't numb it. Feel it. Because feeling is healing. Put your hand on your heart, on your tummy, on your face, on your throat. Where is the pain? Where do you feel the pain, my love? In your heart? Put your hand on your heart. And no, it is not. There's nothing wrong with being emotional. There's nothing wrong with having emotions. Don't butt up against this. Oh, emotions. I don't have emotions. I'm a man. All this fucking bollocks, because I feel I'm talking to a man here. You have emotions. You are a human being. We're all fucking human beings. We all have emotions. Having an emotion does not make you weak. Embracing your emotions, healing your trauma, that is one of the strongest and most amazing things that you can do. And it will ensure that you do not do to you what your father did to you. You will not do to your children what your father did to you, even. But you do continue to do what your father did to you, because until you heal this, you will be judging yourself in the same way. In that moment, having an emotion. We don't have emotions. That's your father's voice. That's not your voice. And he's lived rent-free in your house since you were a little boy, so it's time to give it up. I love you. You can do this work. If I can do it, you can do it. I love you. If you need anything, just get in touch.